Okay, let's talk about the difference between quantities and units. For us, a quantity is what we're measuring, and the unit is what we're measuring that quantity in. So let's look at some examples. So let's think about what's something we can measure. So we can measure the height of something, the width of something, the depth of something. So we can measure distances. So let's classify all those as distance. That would be the quantity. The unit would be what we're measuring that distance in. So we can measure that distance in feet, meters, miles, kilometers, centimeters. You get the idea. We've got a lot of leadway. We can even measure in light years. So we have a lot of different units that we can use to measure distance. We usually either have a standard unit we go by, or we pick the one that matches the length that we're going to do the most. Well, what's some other quantities that we can measure? Well, we can measure weight. Now, in the metric system, weight is a force. Matter of fact, let's put force right next to it. In the metric unit, that's measured in newtons. And a newton is a kilogram meter per second squared. In the English system, or imperial system, whichever you prefer, we call them pounds. Right. We're going to mostly stick with metric system units because that's what we're going to use all the time. What's something else we can measure? We can measure, well, something related to weight is mass. Now, there is actually a difference in these two. Weight is the force due to gravity, while mass is how much matter an object contains. So, for our unit, for mass in the metric system, well, that's easy. We're going to use grams or kilograms. In the English system, it's actually a slug. Let's see, what some other things we can measure. We can measure energy. If you think about it, you probably know the unit for energy. It's a joule. Now, a joule is a kilogram meter squared over second squared. If you're driving, a lot of times you measure your speed or your velocity. And speed's measured in, well, kilometers per hour, meters per second, miles per hour. Again, you get the idea. We can measure temperature. And we got three main units for those. We have degrees Celsius, degrees Fahrenheit, and Kelvin. We can measure time. And we've got a lot of units for time, sort of like distance. We can measure in seconds, minutes, hours, days, centuries, millennium, milliseconds, nanoseconds, eons, well, whatever that is. We can measure in a lot of different things with time. Let's see. We've got, what's something? Oh, acceleration. We can measure acceleration. And acceleration is meters per second squared. Well, what this gets into is the difference between what we call a fundamental unit and a derived unit. A fundamental unit is the most basic. It's our standard unit. It can't be broken down to something smaller in most cases. And for that, for this list, our fundamental quantities would be distance, mass, and time. We'll get back to temperature a little bit later, but distance, mass, and time. Now, if those are our fundamental quantities, we need our basic units for this, our standard units. And we're going to use what's called the MKS system. A lot of times people just call it the SI system. The SI system is a little bit more than what I'm going to get into. That has to do with that temperature and some other things. But we're going to use the MKS system. So our fundamental quantities are distance, mass, and time. And our fundamental units that we're going to use are meters. So if I give you something in kilometers, you're going to change it to meters. If I give you something in centimeters, you're going to change it to meters. We're always going to make sure it's in meters. Mass is going to be kilograms. Okay. In chemistry, they may have used grams, but in physics, we use kilograms as our basic unit for mass. And time is going to be seconds. And so if you look, that's where we get the MKS system. All times are in seconds. All mass are in kilograms. And so let's say I give you something where we're going to figure out the orbit of the Earth. Well, we're going to make sure that that distance is in meters. And for the Earth to go around the sun once, that's 1 year. So we have to change that 1 year into seconds. So these are our standard units that we're going to go by. Okay? All right. That is the difference between quantity and units. Quantities are what we're measuring. Units are what we're measuring in. And we've got 3 standard units that we're going to start off with. Meters, kilograms, and seconds with distance, mass, and time. All right. Thank you. See you later.